In just 28 seconds, what began as casual banter between Seth Meyers and Prince Harry exploded into one of the most shocking confrontations in late-night television history. The Duke of Sussex, who appeared on last night's show to promote his latest charitable initiative, found himself in a verbal sparring match that would end with security being called and cameras abruptly cutting to commercial. What viewers witnessed was a complete meltdown of royal composure, revealing the entitled, combative side of Harry that his critics have long suspected lurked beneath the polished public persona. The tension was palpable from the moment Prince Harry walked onto the late-night stage. While the studio audience erupted in their usual enthusiastic applause, seasoned observers could detect something different in Harry's demeanor. Gone was the easy smile and relaxed posture that had characterized his previous media appearances. Instead, he carried himself with a stiff formality, his jaw set in a way that suggested he was already on the defensive before Seth had even asked his first question. "Welcome back to Late Night. I'm Seth Meyers, and joining me tonight is Prince Harry." Seth began with his characteristic warmth, but Harry's response was notably curt. Where most guests would offer a gracious thank you or share in the host's enthusiasm, Harry simply nodded and muttered, "Good to be here, I suppose." The comment drew an awkward chuckle from the audience, but Seth's trained eye caught the underlying dismissiveness in the prince's tone. The first few minutes proceeded with standard promotional questions about Harry's upcoming charity gala, but it was clear that the Duke was growing increasingly agitated with each inquiry. When Seth asked about the inspiration behind his latest philanthropic venture, Harry's answer was rambling and defensive, peppered with subtle criticisms of the British media and veiled references to his family's lack of support for his initiatives. "You know, Seth, it's fascinating how people are so quick to judge when they don't understand the full picture," Harry said, his voice carrying an edge that hadn't been there moments before. "The press, my family, even supposed allies. Everyone seems to have an opinion about what I should or shouldn't be doing with my life." Seth, sensing the shift in energy, attempted to lighten the mood with a gentle joke about the challenges of family dynamics, something his audience could relate to. "Well, I think we can all understand family drama. I mean, my mother still calls me to ask why I didn't become a doctor like she wanted." The comment was designed to create a moment of shared humanity, but Harry's reaction was unexpectedly hostile. "That's not the same thing at all," Harry snapped, his voice rising slightly. "You don't have your entire family orchestrating campaigns against you in the media. You don't have your father and brother actively working to undermine everything you try to accomplish." The sudden intensity of his response caught both Seth and the audience off guard, creating an uncomfortable silence that stretched longer than anyone was comfortable with. Seth, ever the professional, tried to pivot the conversation back to safer territory, but Harry seemed determined to air his grievances. "Look, I came here tonight to talk about important work that actually matters, and instead we're making light of serious issues. Do you know what it's like to have every single thing you do scrutinized, criticized, and twisted by people who have never lived a day in your shoes?" The host's expression shifted from friendly curiosity to professional concern as he recognized the warning signs of a guest spiraling out of control. "Harry, I think maybe we're getting a bit off track here. Why don't we talk about the positive impact your charity work is having? I know our audience would love to hear about." "Off track?" Harry interrupted, his voice now carrying a distinctly condescending tone that sent ripples of discomfort through the studio audience. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. The moment someone tries to speak their truth, tries to address real issues, everyone wants to change the subject. It's the same pattern over and over again." The atmosphere in the studio had shifted dramatically from the light-hearted energy typical of late-night television to something far more tense and unpredictable. Audience members were exchanging glances, unsure whether they were witnessing an unscripted moment of genuine emotion or something more concerning. Seth's production team, watching from the wings, were already discussing contingency plans, their fingers hovering over buttons that could cut to commercial at a moment's notice. What made the situation even more uncomfortable was Harry's apparent obliviousness to how his behavior was being received. While the audience grew increasingly quiet and Seth's smile became more strained with each passing moment, the prince seemed to interpret their discomfort as validation of his persecution complex, rather than a reaction to his increasingly erratic conduct. The breaking point came when Seth, in a last-ditch effort to salvage the interview, made what he clearly intended as a supportive comment about the challenges of public life. I can only imagine how difficult it must be to balance personal happiness with public expectations. It takes real courage to, but Harry cut him off with a laugh that contained no humor whatsoever, a sound that would haunt viewers long after the credits rolled. Courage? Harry's voice dripped with contempt as he leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing. You think you understand courage, Seth? Sitting here in your comfortable studio, reading jokes off teleprompters, making millions while contributing absolutely nothing meaningful to the world. The venom in his voice was unmistakable now, and several audience members visibly recoiled at the sudden attack on their beloved host. Seth's professional mask finally began to slip, his eyebrows raising in genuine surprise at the unprovoked assault on his character and career. Harry, I'm not sure where this is coming from, but I think maybe we should— No, let's not deflect anymore, Harry interrupted, his voice rising to a level that made the microphones crackle slightly. You want to talk about courage? Real courage is standing up to an institution that spent decades protecting predators while destroying the reputation of a woman who tried to modernize them. Real courage is walking away from billions of dollars and centuries of tradition because you refuse to be complicit in a system built on oppression and racism. The studio fell into a stunned silence that was so complete you could hear the air conditioning humming in the background. This wasn't just an uncomfortable interview anymore. This was a full-scale meltdown being broadcast live to millions of viewers. Seth's writers, who had been frantically scribbling potential joke additions on their notepads just minutes earlier, now sat frozen, watching their carefully planned show disintegrate in real time. Seth, drawing on years of experience handling difficult situations, attempted to regain control with the kind of calm authority that had made him successful. Harry, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. I was simply trying to acknowledge— Acknowledge what? Harry's voice cracked slightly, as his composure continued to deteriorate. The fact that you, like everyone else in this godforsaken country, would rather make jokes than address the real issues? You sit here night after night, making light of everything, treating serious topics like entertainment for your mindless audience. The insult to his audience was the final straw for Seth, who had maintained his professionalism even as Harry had attacked him personally. His jaw tightened visibly, and when he spoke, his voice carried a steely edge that his regular viewers had never heard before. All right, that's enough. I've tried to be respectful here, Harry, but you're way out of line. These people came here to have a good time, not to be insulted by someone who's forgotten how to show basic human decency. Harry's eyes flashed dangerously at the pushback, his face flushing red with indignation. Decency? You want to lecture me about decency? You're part of the same media machine that hounded my mother to her death and then spent the next 25 years trying to do the same to my wife. And you have the audacity to sit there and talk to me about decency? The mention of Diana sent shockwaves through the studio. Several audience members gasped audibly, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This had gone far beyond awkward television. They were witnessing something that felt deeply personal and painful, but also manipulative in the way Harry was weaponizing his trauma to justify his inexcusable behavior. Seth's expression hardened further, his patience finally exhausted. Harry, I'm genuinely sorry for the pain you've experienced, but that doesn't give you the right to come on my show and attack me, my staff, and my audience. We invited you here in good faith to discuss your charitable work, not to be your verbal punching bags. Good faith? Harry laughed again, that same chilling sound that had marked the beginning of his spiral. There's no such thing as good faith in this business. Everything is calculated. Everything is designed to make you look foolish while they profit off your pain. You think I don't see what this is? Another opportunity for American media to paint me as the unstable, difficult prince while ignoring the legitimate grievances I'm raising. The paranoia in his voice was becoming increasingly apparent, and several production assistants could be seen whispering urgently into their headsets, clearly discussing whether they needed to intervene. The show was spiraling into territory that no one had prepared for, and Harry showed no signs of backing down from his increasingly erratic behavior. Seth stood up from his desk, his movement deliberate and commanding. Harry, I think we need to take a break here. This clearly isn't working. And I'm not going to continue this conversation if you can't treat everyone here with basic respect. His voice carried the authority of someone who had finally reached his limit, but also the professionalism of a host who understood that millions of people were watching this unfold. But Harry's response would push things beyond the point of no return, setting the stage for a confrontation that would make television history for all the wrong reasons. "Don't you dare walk away from me," Harry shouted, his voice echoing through the studio as he shot up from his chair with such force that it nearly toppled backward. The sudden movement caused several audience members in the front row to instinctively lean back in their seats. "You don't get to dismiss me like I'm some nobody off the street. I am a prince of the realm, and I've sacrificed more for the greater good than you could ever comprehend." Seth turned back to face Harry, his expression now one of complete disbelief mixed with barely contained anger. "Are you serious right now? You're pulling rank? After everything you just said about institutions and oppression, you're going to stand there and demand respect based on a title you've spent years criticizing?" The hypocrisy wasn't lost on anyone in the studio, and you could feel the collective shift in the room as whatever sympathy might have remained for Harry evaporated completely. Even the most polite audience members were now openly staring in shock at what they were witnessing. "You wouldn't understand," Harry spat, pointing an accusatory finger at Seth. "None of you understand what it's like to have every decision you make scrutinized by people who have never had to make a real sacrifice in their lives. You sit here in your little bubble, making jokes about things that actually matter, while people like me do the real work of changing the world." Seth's laugh was sharp and incredulous. "The real work? Harry, you just spent the last 10 minutes attacking everyone in this room, including people who paid their hard-earned money to come support a show that celebrates comedy and brings joy to people's lives. What exactly is noble about that?" "Joy?" Harry's voice cracked with bitter laughter. "You think entertainment is more important than justice? Than holding institutions accountable for their crimes? This is exactly the problem with America. You're all so obsessed with being entertained that you ignore the real issues plaguing the world." The insult to America and its people was the final straw for many in the audience. Several people began booing, their patience finally exhausted with Harry's entitled tirade. The sound seemed to snap something in the prince, whose face contorted with rage at being challenged by what he clearly viewed as commoners. "How dare you!" he screamed at the audience, his voice nearly breaking. "I've given up everything, my family, my country, my inheritance, to fight for what's right. And you have the audacity to boo me? You people have no idea what real struggle looks like." Seth stepped forward, his voice cutting through Harry's hysteria with ice-cold authority. "That's it. We're done here." "Security!" His call was unnecessary. 2 burly security guards had already appeared at the edge of the stage, clearly having been summoned by the production team who had watched the situation deteriorate beyond salvaging. "You can't throw me out!" Harry shrieked, his composure now completely shattered. "I'm a guest on this show. I have a platform, and I have things to say that people need to hear." But even as he protested, he began backing away from the advancing security guards, his earlier bravado crumbling in the face of actual consequences. Seth's voice was steady but final. "Harry, you were a guest. Guests treat their hosts and fellow human beings with respect. You've made it clear that's not something you're capable of tonight." The dismissal was delivered with the kind of quiet dignity that made it all the more devastating. "This is exactly what I'm talking about," Harry continued to shout as the security guards flanked him, though they hadn't yet made physical contact. "The moment someone speaks truth to power, the moment someone refuses to play along with your sanitized version of reality, you silence them. This is censorship." The audience was now openly jeering, their initial shock having transformed into outright hostility towards someone who had come into their space and attacked not just their host, but their intelligence and their country. One voice from the crowd shouted, "Just leave already," which prompted a chorus of similar sentiments. Harry's face was now bright red, sweat beading on his forehead, as he realized he had completely lost control of the narrative. "You'll regret this, Seth. All of you will regret this, when history judges you for choosing entertainment over enlightenment, comfort over confronting difficult truths." "The only thing I regret," Seth replied, his voice carrying across the studio with perfect clarity, "is not ending this conversation 10 minutes ago when you first started disrespecting everyone here." He then turned to address his audience directly, effectively dismissing Harry entirely. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for what you've just witnessed. This is not what we're about here at Late Night. The final humiliation of being ignored proved too much for Harry's already fragile ego. Don't you turn your back on me, he screamed, but his voice was already growing distant as the security guards began escorting him toward the exit. You're all going to pay for this. The world will know what really happened here tonight. But his threats fell on deaf ears as the studio audience began applauding Seth's handling of the situation. The sound of their approval seemed to drive Harry into an even greater frenzy as he was led backstage, his voice echoing through the corridors as he continued his incoherent rant about media conspiracies and institutional corruption. Seth waited until the last echoes of Harry's voice had faded before addressing his audience one final time. Well, that certainly wasn't in the script, he said with a weary smile, earning a laugh that was part relief, part disbelief from the crowd. I think we can all agree that when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them the first time. The cameras cut to commercial, but not before capturing the standing ovation Seth received from an audience that had just witnessed their host defend not only himself, but their dignity and intelligence against someone who had revealed himself to be everything his critics had always claimed he was. The prince who had entered the studio demanding respect had left in disgrace, his true character finally exposed for the world to see.